A man stands in front of a house in Mayfair. Not just any house. 48 Upper Grosvenor Street, London. Wealth behind heavy doors. His wife is not there. She is in New York. He does not bring a policeman. No lawyer, no judge. He brings a locksmith. The locksmith opens a locked cabinet in his wife's private rooms. Inside lie photographs, private images, compromising, dangerous. They show a woman, recognizable by a three-strand pearl necklace, and a man. But his face is not in the picture. The woman will later be publicly destroyed. The man will be protected until 2063. Her name, Margaret Campbell, Duchess of Argyll. At the time, the story was told as a scandal. A duchess, a husband, affairs, photographs, a divorce. But that is only the surface. Because in truth, this is not about what Margaret did. It is about what was done to her. Her private life was spread out in a courtroom. Her intimate life became a national headline. Her name was printed, mocked, repeated. But the man in the same photographs? His name disappeared into a government report. So the question is not only, who was the man without a face? The question is, why was his name more dangerous than her shame? Margaret Wigham is born in Scotland in 1912. Her father, George Wigham, has made his fortune in synthetic textiles. Margaret spends the first years of her childhood in New York. She is privately educated there, and the connections she forms will follow her for the rest of her life. From an early age, she is not only seen, she is looked at. In 1930, she is presented at court. She is young, rich, beautiful, and exactly what the society press loves. In 1933, she marries Charles Sweeney, an American businessman and amateur golfer. Outside the Brompton Oratory in London, thousands gather. Traffic comes to a halt. The newspapers write about her dress, her appearance, her future. Margaret is 20 years old, and even then it is clear. Her public role is not to act. Her role is to be looked at. It seems like a privilege, but it is also a trap, because anyone made this visible can later be publicly destroyed. In 1947, Margaret's first marriage is over. A few years later, she meets Ian Douglas Campbell, the man who will become the 11th Duke of Argyll. He brings with him one of the oldest names in Scotland. He brings Inverary Castle. He brings aristocratic history. But history is expensive. Inverary Castle is not a romantic symbol on a postcard. It is a property that has to be maintained. Roofs, rooms, staff, land, repairs. And Ian Campbell has problems. Debts, alcohol, gambling, a damaged fortune. In 1951, Margaret and Ian marry. On the surface, beauty and aristocracy. Underneath, money and access. What is documented? Margaret's funds flow into the restoration of Inverary Castle. Later biographers have also reported that Campbell did not present his financial situation and certain arrangements openly and honestly before the marriage. The accusation of a manipulated or falsified settlement is in the air. What remains? Her money helped preserve his family legacy. And this is where the real conflict begins. The Duke gets a restored castle. Margaret gets a title. But the castle is not hers, and the title can be taken away from her again. The marriage does not break in a single day. It slowly turns into a system of distrust. Both lead separate lives. Both have relationships outside the marriage. Both know that the facade has grown thin. But Ian Campbell does not stop at suspicion. He has Margaret watched. Reports state that her car was wiretapped. This is not a spontaneous outburst of jealousy. This is planning. Someone has to acquire the equipment. Someone has to install it. Someone has to listen. Margaret answers in her own way. She attacks his line of succession. She produces documents suggesting that Campbell's sons from his second marriage are not biologically his. The authenticity of these documents is later disputed. This is the moment when an unhappy marriage turns into a dynastic conflict. Not love against betrayal, but property against property. Then, at some point, the money stops flowing. Margaret no longer funds Inverarray the way she did before. Shortly afterwards, Ian Campbell stands in Mayfair. Again, no policeman, no lawyer, a locksmith. He has a locked cabinet opened. What he finds inside will become the most powerful piece of evidence of his life. Private photographs. On some of the images, Margaret is recognizable, especially through those pearls. That belonged to her public image. On others, a man appears whose face is not shown. The press will later call him the headless man. The image is almost too symbolic to be real. The woman is visible. The man remains without a face. Ian files for divorce. And what was a private marriage becomes a national tribunal. In 1963, the case is heard in Edinburgh. For 11 days, the files contain more than just photographs. There is also a list. Up to 88 men are said to have been named or suspected. Men from society, politics, diplomacy, perhaps even from royal circles. Not every name is verifiable. Not every claim is proven. But for the public, the number is enough. 88 is no longer information. 88 is a headline. Margaret tries to defend herself. She raises countercharges against the Duke. But her counterattack collapses when a key witness fails to appear. What remains, above all, is this: the case against her. Lord Wheatley, the judge, delivers a ruling that goes far beyond sober divorce. Reasoning. It runs to roughly 50,000 words. He describes Margaret in language that is not only legal, but morally devastating. What is documented? He calls her promiscuous. He speaks of a debased appetite. He portrays her as a woman who has crossed the limits of normal marriage. What matters is this: the court does not only end a marriage, it produces a public figure. Margaret is not simply divorced. She is put on display. But while Margaret is being publicly dissected, one question remains open. Who is the man in the photographs? And here the story shifts. Because 1963 is not just any year, it is the year of the Profumo scandal. John Profumo, the British Secretary of State for War, is politically destroyed by an affair, partly because the question hangs in the air whether intimate relationships during the Cold War can be a security risk. Suddenly, private life is no longer private. Intimacy can mean leverage. Leverage can become a problem of state. And in exactly this climate, Lord Denning is brought in, not as a gossip figure, but as one of the most senior jurists in the country. Denning is to find out who the man without a face is. 5 men are repeatedly named as central suspects in later reports. Among them, Duncan Sandys, government minister and son-in-law of Winston Churchill, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Hollywood star with close ties to British society. Other names from business, diplomacy, and London's elite. Denning interviews. He compares handwriting. He has physical features examined. This is not a newspaper game. This is a state investigation. Then comes the decisive point. The result is not published, not in part, not redacted, not explained. The documents are sealed. In 1993, 30 years later, it is decided again not to release them. Until 2063, 100 years after the trial. Margaret does not only lose the case, she loses her world. Friends disappear. Invitations end. The society that celebrated her for decades withdraws. Later, she sells her house. She lives at the Grosvenor House Hotel. In the end, she can no longer pay the bills. In 1990, she is removed from the hotel. In 1993, she dies after a fall in a nursing home in Pimlico. She is 80 years old. In the same year, the Denning file stays closed. That is the real cut of this story. The woman is dead. The man's name remains protected. Margaret Campbell lies in Brookwood. The file lies in Whitehall. Her name was printed. His was not.